Hey guys, you might be asking yourself which starter is the best to choose when going into a brand new game of red version or blue version, and you have three starters, of course: Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle. I'm going to be giving pros and cons to choosing each of these and ranking them third, second, and first respectively based on those pros and cons. So starting off, what would be my third choice is probably going to be the water starter, and that is Squirtle. Now, kind of interestingly enough, even though you can make an argument that he's the third choice with just a typical playthrough, he's actually the best choice if you're speed running the game, so trying to finish from start to end as quickly as possible. But the reason why I put him as my number 3 choice is there's just so many other water types in this game that Squirtle would have to compete with. So there's so many other water types that you can get in your party that are really solid. Things like Vaporeon, Starmie, you can go with Gyarados, Lapras, among others. Just the fact that there's a wealth of water Pokemon to choose from, that's a big reason why you might pick Squirtle as a third choice. Also, Charizard and Venusaur are among the best of their respective types, being fire and grass, respectively, whereas Blastoise, he just has a ton of other things to compete with, and he's not necessarily the top tier of water Pokemon in Gen 1. Now, out of all the starters, Squirtle does have the strongest defense statistic, and he's going to be good against fire, ground, and rock type in terms of effectiveness, where he's going to be bad against electric and grass. So that means that Squirtle's actually going to be really good against the first gym, Brock, because of course, his Onix. He's got rock type, and then going to have resistance against Misty, the second gym, given the water type that Squirtle has and the water Pokemon that Misty is going to use. But then after that, the third gym is electric, and the fourth gym is grass, so Squirtle isn't going to be as good of a pick in terms of going into the third and fourth gym, respectively, earlier on in the game. And down in the video description, I'll post some good movesets that you can use, whether you pick Squirtle, Charmander, or Bulbasaur as your starter. Potentially a moveset that you might want to go with Squirtle in a playthrough is something like the HM's Surf and Strength, and then also maybe teaching it Blizzard, as well as something like Body Slam or Submission. Those are some moves that you could potentially pick if you're going with Squirtle as your starter as you work your way through the game. That might be a decent moveset that you could choose. So moving on from Squirtle, which I think is probably the third choice in my opinion, the second choice, I actually feel like it's Charmander, and that's even with the fact that he's not great against the first two gyms, being Brock and Misty with rock and water types, respectively. Now, you might ask, well, then why is he your number 2 choice, given his disadvantage against the first two gyms? And the positives here for Charmander is the fact that he learns Ember relatively early on at level 9, which is a solid move. Early, you can get your way through Viridian Forest, and also, he's the only fire Pokemon that you have access to until the portion of the game that's between the third and the fourth gym. So if you want to have a fire Pokemon in your team, you're actually going to have to wait a bit later in the game if you do not pick Charmander. And then Charizard is one of the upper tier fire type Pokemon in Gen 1, so that's another good reason why you might want to pick him. Charmander is going to be good against things like grass, bug, and ice. And then when he evolves into Charizard, also being good against fighting, because when Charmander evolves into Charizard, he adds the flying type. Now, there's also some things that Charizard isn't going to be great against, particularly rock. It damages Charizard 4 times. And then also water, very prevalent in the game, is going to be good against Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard. And then also when he's Charizard, having that flying type, not going to be good against electric. Charmander is the fastest. He has the highest speed stat of all of the starters, so speed stat is really important because the faster you are with that speed stat, then you get to go first when battling, so that's something to keep in mind. And a potential moveset that you could teach Charmander throughout the playthrough as he evolves into Charizard eventually: Flamethrower, FireBlast, Slash, and then maybe something like Dig or Earthquake. Those are some potential moves that you could go ahead and teach your Charizard. And that leaves us with the number 1 choice, and particularly if you're a beginning player, this is maybe one of your first times playing, or you haven't played in a long time, I recommend going with Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur is a grass poison type, and though the poison type doesn't really do much for Bulbasaur offensively, it makes him immune to poison, which is really nice because there's a number of Pokemon, especially early on in the game in Viridian Forest, where you can get poisoned, which can be kind of annoying. So having that poison resistance and not having to deal with that as you work your way through the game is kind of nice, again, especially if you're a beginning player. Bulbasaur is really good against the first two gyms, Brock and Misty, with rock and water types. Bulbasaur is going to be good against them. Bulbasaur has the best special stat among the starters, so that's great for having strong grass type attacks as well as having a stronger special defense, good against, of course, those Pokemon that are going to use special typing to attack against Bulbasaur. And Bulbasaur is one of the upper tier grass type Pokemon in Gen 1. Bulbasaur is good against rock type, water type, and ground type, which are very prevalent in this game, especially, when you're working your way through going against random trainers and battling, and just in the wild, water, rock, ground type, being good against those is a pretty good thing to be super effective against. Although the downside here to Bulbasaur, and then obviously as he evolves into Ivysaur and Venusaur, he has grass and poison typing. Not going to be great against flying. Bug type is really powerful against Bulbasaur. Fire, not good against that. Ice, and then as well as Psychic. So the downside here to Bulbasaur is there's many things that are super effective against him. So that is something to keep in mind. And a potential moveset that you can use if picking Bulbasaur, something like Razorleaf, and then Leech Seed pairing it with the TM Toxic. That's kind of an interesting combo there. You can also teach Bulbasaur Body Slam. And I'm kind of just giving general movesets that you can use as you're playing through the game as you continue to evolve your Pokemon, but also down in the video description, I'll post what are some of the more competitive movesets that you can use, whether you're going with Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. So that's the ranking that I put with the 3 starters, Squirtle being number 3, given how many other solid water-type Pokemon there are to choose in the game. Charmander number 2, given the fact that you can't get a fire type in your party until a bit later on between the 3rd and 4th gym, and also Charmander evolving into Charizard, eventually one of the best fire types in Gen 1, and then also Bulbasaur, probably the number 1 choice given how strong he is against the first 2 gyms. Resistant to poison, which is really nice. One of the best grass type Pokemon in the game. Definitely a good choice. So those are some pros and cons with the 3 starters. You can go with any of them if you want, if your favorite Pokemon is Squirtle, or if you're especially going into speedrunning, that's the Pokemon to choose. So even though it is the number 3 here on my list, it's not like you have to avoid him if you definitely want to choose him. And then even though Charmander isn't so good against the first 2 gyms, it's the only early fire Pokemon that you can get, and he's one of the best fire types in the game. And then there's just a number of different pros and cons that go with these 3 starters. But just to recap, Bulbasaur, number 1 choice. Right behind that, Charmander, number 2, and Squirtle, number 3. I appreciate you guys stopping by for this video. Consider subscribing, and I'll catch you back here next time.